distinguished speakers. And in order to put this aside, I will start by introducing the speakers as we have them. So we have Dr. Tariq Al-Nafouri. He is the lead for the S20 Task Force number 3. He got his MS degree from Georgia Institute of Technologies and his PhD from Stanford University, all in electrical engineering area. He was a research associate at California Institute of Technology and a Fulbright scholar in University of Southern California in 2008. He is currently a professor of electrical engineering at King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, or KAUST. His area of research includes statistical signal processing, localization, machine learning, and their applications. He has over 300 scientific publications. He was an associate editor of IEEE Transactions of Signal Processing and recipient of Al-Mara'i Prize for Innovative Research in Communications in 2009. In addition to Dr. Nafouri, we have Dr. Rod Tucker, who is the co-lead for the S20 Task Force 3. He is a laureate emeritus professor at the University of Melbourne. He is a fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer, the Optical Society of America, the Australian Academy of Science, and the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. He has previously held various positions at companies including AT&T, Bell Laboratories, Hewlett-Packard, and others. He has served as an advisor to the Australian government on the establishment of a national broadband network. In '97, he was awarded the Australia Prize for his contributions to telecommunications. We also have on the panel Dr. Richard Rashid. He holds the title of Corporate Vice President Emeritus of Microsoft Corporation, and he is the founder of Microsoft Research. Dr. Rashid was on the faculty of Carnegie Mellon University from 79 to 91 and joined Microsoft to found Microsoft Research in 1991. He retired from Microsoft in 2016, and he is also best known for his work in operating systems. While at CMU, he actually developed the Mac operating system, which became the foundation for a number of different operating systems, including Linux, Mac OS, and iOS. Dr. Rashid is also known for pioneering work in computer vision, networking, distributed file systems, distributed sensor networks, and related technologies. He received many distinguished awards throughout his career and holds honorary doctoral degrees from several universities, including CMU, University of Rochester, and University of Science and Technology in China. So we welcome him. Also, we have with us Dr. Rashid Tahir. He completed his master's and PhD from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the United States of America in 2017. And since then, he has been working at the University of Prince Migran in Saudi Arabia as an assistant professor in the College of Computer and Cyber Sciences. He is currently the head of the Cybersecurity and Forensics Computing Department. His areas of expertise include cybersecurity and privacy, cloud and big data, Internet of Things, and applications of AI and machine learning. And he has published various scientific papers in these areas. We also have on the panel with us Dr. Muhammad Khurram Khan. He's currently working as a professor of cybersecurity at the Center of Excellence in Information Assurance in King Saud University. He is also the founder and CEO of the Global Foundation for Cybersecurity, for Cyber Studies and Research, which is an independent cybersecurity think tank in Washington, D.C., USA. He's also the editor-in-chief of Telecommunication Systems Journal, published by Springer Nature. He has published over 350 publications and also contributed policy papers and brief through T20, which is the think tank for the G20. So we welcome everybody, and we thank you all for your time and participation in this webinar. And we hope that we will all benefit out of this, out of those distinguished speakers and scientists. Of course, as we know, all digital technologies are driving profound changes to society and global economy. And one of the objectives of the S20 Digital Revolution Task Force is to actually consider key issues related to the digital revolution and to recommend policies, basically. So we're recommending policy that strengthens the governance of data and algorithms that make up the digital revolution. Also building resilient infrastructure and secure connectivity that is ubiquitous and reliable and fault tolerant to some extent, and also works to help in building effective and trustworthy AI and machine learning techniques that can be used all over, and facilitate the development of smart and sustainable communities and cities and whatnot. In order to start this panel discussion, we will start with Dr. Tariq Al-Nafouri, the lead for the S20 Task Force 3, and he will be addressing the critical transition to emerging technologies and the key challenges in the digital revolution. Dr. Al-Nafouri, you have 6 to 8 minutes to do that, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Jalal. Thank you, Dr. Jalal, for your kind introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and a good day for our attendees in Saudi Arabia and around the world. First, I would like to thank King Saud University for hosting this webinar. This helps us publicize the months of efforts by the Digital Revolution Task Force. The task force consists of 43 members from science academies of the G20 and also from experts of research and academics institutions in Saudi Arabia. I would like to acknowledge the hard work of the task force members and especially acknowledge the dedication of Professor Rod Tucker, the task force co-lead. Now, to appreciate the digital technology, what the digital technology provides, let me start with some numbers. The figure that you show compares the economic impact of various technologies in 2025 in trillions of dollars. This includes digital technologies like mobile internet, artificial intelligence, robotics, and it also includes other technologies like genomics, renewables, 3D printing, etc. What you can see is that the digital technologies have around 7 times more economic impact than other technologies. So now the question, however, is that if we need to advance and harness digital technology, we need to foresee the future for critical transitions and challenges that lie ahead. So what do we mean by a critical transition? By definition, a critical transition is a threshold or a tipping point in a shifting system beyond which the system moves from one state into another. The cartoon that you see here illustrates the idea. It represents the digital infrastructure, and as you can see, this small box here is a tipping point that if we remove, the whole infrastructure will collapse. The pandemic that we are living through is one clear example of a critical transition. It results in unfortunate loss of lives and in such a big hit to our economy. Now, from the digital revolution point of view, it had some positives. For example, it accelerated the adoption of digital technologies related to e-health, e-learning, and remote work. On the other hand, it had some negatives. For example, it stressed our connectivity infrastructures. So what we did in this, what we need is foresight to navigate such critical transitions. Specifically in the task force, we focused on 3 questions. The first question is, what critical transitions will affect the digital revolution, both from a positive and from a negative aspect? The second question is, what challenges prevent us from facing these critical transitions? And finally, what policies do we need to set forth to overcome these critical transitions and challenges? So in the task force, we identified 6 challenges. Let me go over them. The first critical transition is disruption to connectivity. As I said, during the pandemic, we witnessed an unusual increase in connectivity demand, which led sometimes to a reduced quality of service. Now, we expect more extreme disruptions due to environmental disasters, like, for example, forest fires, earthquakes, or even due to geopolitical conflicts. In addition, disruptions could be caused by technology. These 2 pictures here show you the big race that we have been witnessing recently towards sending more and more satellites by big giants like, for example, Amazon and SpaceX. What this is doing is that it's increasing the density of satellites around the Earth. And what we will do, what's this resulting in is an increasing density of derribs. Now, if you can imagine a chain reaction of collisions between these derivatives could result in destroying many satellites and catastrophic failure of communications for millions of users. So this is one critical transition that we identified. Another critical transition is basically another vulnerability is affecting data. We are witnessing an increasing frequency of cyber attacks, data theft, and fraud. And you can argue that the more ubiquitous digital technology becomes, the more vulnerable we become to such attacks. Now, the vulnerabilities I talked about related to connectivity and to data are eroding our trust in digital technology. This has actually been compounded recently by the emergence of deepfake and misinformation, to the extent that we don't believe what we hear or even what we see anymore. Now, a fourth critical transition that has always been there is the digital divide. It refers to the variation of internet connectivity across the world. The map that you see here shows that the connectivity in the Western Hemisphere is above 80%, while it is less than 30% in places like Africa. This divide also could happen within a country where low-income neighborhoods or rural areas might suffer from low connectivity. The digital divide affects people's economies and livelihoods and may result in social and political disruptions. Now, the final set of critical transitions basically are affecting the society, are changing the societal landscape. Firstly, we are witnessing an increasing trend of urbanization. For example, if you look at this figure here in blue, you notice that in 2050, we will have 10 million inhabitants in this world, 2/3 of which will be living in cities, which will be causing heavy loads on the city's operations and resources. Now, there are other dimensions of societal change. One is increase in voluntary migration. Another dimension is higher level of unemployment or underemployment that is caused by the pandemic. Now, the biggest reason for this change in societal landscape are digital technologies and social platforms. They are the biggest drivers of change. It's enough to look at our kids and see how they interact with digital technology to appreciate this change. AI and automation are also participating in this change. They're changing the professional landscape and creating new jobs and making others obsolete, as we see here in the AI growth of the market size. It's showing one indication. Now, to be able to deal with these, so these are the transitions. Now, to be able to deal with them, we need to face some challenges. We need to deal with some challenges. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these challenges which are listed here. You can read them faster than I can say them, but the key points are indicated in red. For example, we lack resilient technologies that sustain us in the face of the transitions that I talked about. Another challenge is that many technologies are proprietary. And so oftentimes we find ourselves cornered into single vendor or legacy technologies. Also, dealing with these critical transitions at the scale that I talked about needs awareness at all levels, all the way from users to policy, from the users all the way to policymakers. We require data sharing between institutions and across borders. We require funding and large investments. And we also require definitely collaborations between public and private sectors and also between countries. So to conclude, digital technology being the huge area it is, in the task force, we focused on 4 things: connectivity, artificial intelligence, smart communities, and data governance or cybersecurity. And so to conclude, foresight is needed to navigate the critical transitions that humanity is facing, as we are feeling right now with the pandemic. we need to identify these critical transitions. We need to identify the challenges that stand in the way of addressing these challenges. And so consequently, we need to provide policies that allows us to deal with these transitions, critical transitions and challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq. A very interesting talk, and I think we'll get back to it soon. Very much related to what Dr. Tariq Nafouri said, is basically having a resilient and sustainable digital infrastructure. Of course, this is of utmost importance if we want to actually enable the digital revolution and live in a digital utopia to some extent. So our next speaker, Dr. Rod Tucker, will actually touch on that particular thing and will address resilient and sustainable digital infrastructure. So Dr. Tucker, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm just trying to share my screen, which I've never done before. Can you see it yet? I'm new to Zoom and I have not, well, I can't share my screen, but I will, you don't need to see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, you can go ahead.
Let me just try one more time.
Dr. Nafouri, can you stop sharing, please?
Maybe that's the problem.
Okay, you can try again now, just in case.
Ah.
Okay, so that was the problem. Okay, please go ahead.
Good, thank you. So, can you see that whole screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I'm just going to see if I get it on that. There we go. Is that it?
Okay, no, it's actually zoomed more than, yeah, we just see parts of it.
I'll go back to where I was. Is that okay? How's that?
No, still we're missing parts of it, but...
oh, it's interesting. I've got I might be able to pull it out. It's interesting.
Okay, I think now it's working.
I think that's good. Yes, that's good.
Ah, so you can see it now. So I'm talking about resilient and sustainable infrastructure. So this is one of the topics that the Task Force on Digital Revolution considered. And the question is, why are we interested in resilient infrastructure? And I guess the answer is obvious. Society is ever more dependent on digital technology, infrastructure and data. I mean, everything depends on it. And without it, we are really in real trouble. So any impact or damage or loss to the infrastructure is more significant now than it ever was before. And examples of this kind of damage or loss could come from extreme weather events such as floods or cyclones, climate change induced catastrophes, and here in Australia where I live, we had huge bushfires in the last summer, which caused large amount of, a lot of destruction of infrastructure, and some of the 4G networks are only now being replaced. There are also accidents that occur, which can't be attributed to the climate. And more importantly these days is the question of malicious damage, such as terrorism or cyber attacks. So taking this all into account, there is really a pressing need to improve the robustness and resilience of the physical infrastructure, and to minimise the disruption of the loss of life and so on. And another almost equally important issue is the question of maintaining trust in the digital infrastructure. If the public is not doesn't have trust in the infrastructure, then its continued growth and impact on society is likely to be diminished. There is also a need to protect data, and including intellectual property, private and personal data. So we've considered some solutions in the task force, and some of these solutions then lead into some of the recommendations which will be published soon. Clearly, we need a stronger physical infrastructure, and part of this is about redundancy. And there are a whole variety of alternative solutions that I haven't got time to go into here. But for example, low Earth orbit satellite internet access could provide opportunities for providing access to people in locations where local disasters occur and provide redundancy from the classical internet access. Distributed data centers and edge computing. If a data center was to go down, or a number of data centers were to go down, that could cause big problem, and distributing the data around the planet is really important. And as is diversification of global connectivity. More undersea cables, more redundant internet connections are clearly important. So I see Rick there smiling at that one. That must be something that he's familiar with. Sustainable infrastructure, which is the other aspect of our question here. Why are we interested in sustainable infrastructure? Well, the digital infrastructure on the planet, including data centers, the internet, user devices, and so on, by various estimates, consume about 10% of the world's electricity. That's about the same as well, before the pandemic, about the same as the global airline industry. And it's growing. And it's growing because improvements in energy efficiency in the infrastructure, the Moore's law improvement, are slower than the growth in data. So there's more data, but less improvement in efficiency in the infrastructure that's carrying that data. So the total amount of energy being consumed by the global infrastructure in the digital economy is growing. Another important issue here is the question of e-waste. And this is a growing problem worldwide. And part of the problem here is that the lifetime of technologies generations are very short. And we all replace our mobile phones every few years, and the data centers throw out their racks of processors every few years, and it all ends up in heaps of waste. So there needs to be a better way to deal with the lifetime of technologies, and there needs to be more focus on, I guess, birth to death lifetime of electronic and digital infrastructure. So we think that sustainability is a key issue in the area of the digital economy that has not been addressed very extensively in the past, but needs more attention in the future. So there are a number of solutions that might be appropriate here. For example, improved energy efficiency in all infrastructure. Now, while Moore's law can't keep up with everything, there are better ways of designing the infrastructure, and there is a need to really get rid of old infrastructure that's no longer relevant. Energy efficient algorithms. The artificial intelligence is consuming more and more energy, and energy efficient AI algorithms are important. And the good news is that digital infrastructure can in fact create some benefits. For example, using digital technologies to offset greenhouse emissions in other areas. And a prime example is travel replacement by telecommunications and teleconferencing. And the COVID-19 pandemic has been a prime example of how this has been working. Around the world, people have been working from home. There's been less commuting, less cars on the road, fewer aircraft in the air, and the world has continued to communicate. So travel replacement by teleconferencing is a really good news story. And another good news story is smart communities, and our task force has looked at this. Smart communities can be used to provide energy efficiency and sustainability using technologies that provide at a community level better use of energy and more energy efficient use of various technologies. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tucker. A very interesting talk, and we will be getting back to some of the points you mentioned right over there. Also, right now, we will have a talk, as we all know, artificial intelligence or AI, machine learning, and related technologies are expected to revolutionize all aspects of life and work and pleasure, and basically take a major role in any digital revolution. So Dr. Richard Rashid will share his insights on AI and its evolution and role in the digital revolution. So Dr. Rashid, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So during the time that I was at Microsoft Research, about 2.5 decades, running the organization, one of the things that I'd like to do was to challenge my teams periodically to tackle some extremely difficult problem. You know, I would refer to those as impossible things. And one of my impossible things initiatives was to do real-time spoken word speech-to-speech translation. And in particular, I asked my teams back in 2008 that I wanted to be able to give my speeches in China. I would go to China every year. I would speak to thousands of Chinese students and faculty each year as part of our 21st Century Computing conference. And I wanted to be able to do that where my speech was translated automatically from English to Chinese. At the time, the teams told me that this was really not something that they thought they could do anytime soon. Back in 2008, the speech recognition word error rate was about 25% on the standard NIST tests. And that had been true for about 10 years. There had been actually very little progress that had been made in speech recognition. Machine translation at the same time was also, you know, very iffy. The quality of speech translation was relatively poor. And I remember actually having lunch with some people on the speech team, and there was a young researcher that harangued me during lunch, basically saying that what I was asking them was impossible and it was going to take 10 or 15 years. And I said, well, you know, do your best you can, and you know, you can take lots of shortcuts because it's just going to be me. Well, 2 years later, the teams were energized and they felt that they'd reached a point where they thought the system might actually work for me. We actually made it to a stage in China it was the day before the speech was supposed to be given. And what I did was to do a rehearsal where I basically gave my speech and we had the system running. And it actually worked remarkably well. I mean, the teams had done a really great job. But when it made mistakes, it made really weird mistakes. And what I told the team was that I wasn't going to use it the next day. We would try again some other time. But that basically, I didn't want to be on stage and have something inappropriate be said, you know, in Chinese by accident, just because the system behaved improperly. Now, 2 years later, so this is now 2012, the system that they built, they felt was ready again. And when I did when I did my rehearsals with it, I was just really impressed with it. And it was able to quite accurately recognize my speech. It actually translated it into Chinese, and they even built the system in such a way that it would speak Chinese using my own voice, the way I would speak if I were speaking Chinese. So that was a pretty significant milestone. I'm going to show you, if it works, hopefully it will, a very short video clip of me on stage in China back in 2012.
Again, the results are not perfect. There are in fact quite a few errors. 结果并不完美。 There's much work to be done in this area. 在这方面有很多工作要做。But this technology is very promising. 用这个技术很有希望。And we hope in a few years that we'll be able to break down the language barriers between people. 数年后，我们希望能够打破人们之间的语言障碍。
Hopefully you were able to see that. So what happened that made the system that was not working very well in 2010, work really well in 2012? And by the way, that particular speech was my, multi-million view YouTube experience. It's still up on YouTube if you want to see the whole thing. The answer is that there was a transition made in AI technology at that point. In Microsoft Research, working with Jeff Hinton and his team at the University of Toronto, is one of the leaders in that area for speech recognition and machine translation. And using deep neural networks, we were able to actually take the system from a 25% error rate to less than 10%. And in fact, the actual error rate for speech recognition was comparable to the error rate for humans. And that's continued to proceed today. And in fact, you now see many systems from Microsoft and from Google in particular that do real-time speech to speech translation. And this is just a little image from Skype. So what is the key takeaway from this experience that I had? I think one of it is that it was critical to me using that system that I have a mental model of what the system was going to do. That doesn't mean I had to really understand the details of the system. I probably understand them better than most people just because of my background. But the reality is I just needed to have confidence that the system was going to produce something that even when it made a mistake, was going to be a mistake that was understandable, right? It wasn't going to say something outrageous. It wasn't going to have it say something that was going to be inappropriate for the audience. And I think that's important. If the system is too unpredictable, or if it makes, in particular, if it makes unpredictable errors for the human being, you're not going to be confident using it. And another takeaway from this is that it's important that we move away from hand-labeled systems, because the original system back in 2010 was much more human intensive, much more hand-labeled, and you move to more what are now called unsupervised or self-supervised systems, where they can ingest a large amount of data without human intervention, and they build their own models based on the actual data. This helps you eliminate a variety of things. One of the things that it does is it eliminates biases, because human beings, when they label data or when they pick data to use, they bias that data, and the results can be biased in a wide variety of ways. They can just be bad. I mean, you basically don't handle corner cases as well in that situation. So,
Dr. Rashid, sorry to cut you off a little bit, but I think no, the slide is stuck at slide number 1. So I'm not sure why we will try to solve it from our side. Can you try to stop sharing and share it again, because it was stuck actually. So, and the video, we haven't seen the video. Yeah.
Well, it worked on my end.
Oh, okay. Okay, now it seems like it's working. I wonder if we can see the video again, because several people said they couldn't see the video at that time.
Let me try it this way. Can you see that?
Okay, now, yes, we can see it now.
There are in fact quite a few errors. 结果并不完美。There's much work to be done in this area. 在这方面有很多工作要做。But this technology is very promising. 用这个技术很有希望。And we hope in a few years that we'll be able to break down the language barriers between people.
数年后，我们希望能够打破人们之间的语言障碍。
And again, that was 2012. And if you want to see the whole video, it's up on YouTube. And since you may not have seen this slide, I wanted to show this again, which is basically the dramatic change in word error rates for speech recognition that occurred when we began to use deep learning, which was an emerging technology in 2012, as the basis for speech recognition rather than more traditional techniques. And then this was just my last slide. And really, again, trying to make the point that we need to move away from supervised learning and by handcrafted models to systems that are basically based on the data itself, ingest as much data as we possibly can, try to avoid human biases both in labeling and data selection, and in so doing, systems that are built this way tend to be better at handling corner cases and tend to have fewer biases. And so that's done. I'm sorry if it all looked good on my screen, but I'm sorry it didn't always make it all the way to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid, and we really enjoyed your talk and experience right over there. It's amazing the advances in AI in such a very short time, less than 10 years, and it's a big difference, basically, in the technology. Next talk. Of course, we are all eager to be part of this digital revolution and this digital smart city utopia kind of thing. But the problem is that we must be aware of the we must be well. We need to talk more a little bit about the technologies behind that. So basically, we have Internet of Things, and how can Internet of Things devices become, how can we convert connected devices into smart devices, and how can they interoperate with each other, and basically build and give rise to actually smart communities or aware cities and ubiquitous computing and pervasive computing and so on. So next talk is by Dr. Rashid Tahir, and he will give us his insights on IoT interoperability and smart communities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jalal. Really appreciate the kind introduction. Can you see the slides that I'm sharing?
Yes, all clear.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, I'd like to start off by saying that I'm extremely humbled because of the seniority and the level of the peers that have spoken before me. These are really the top guns in the scientific community, and I'm really humbled to be in their presence. I really enjoyed their talks. I'd like to move on to what I'm going to be talking about today. And today, I'll briefly touch upon the Internet of Things and the associated challenges, particularly in the realm of smart communities. Okay, so as Dr. Tariq Al-Nafuri mentioned in his talk, critical transitions are fast emerging, whether they are environmental, geopolitical, technological, and they have really accelerated this discussion on digital transformation. And now we are seeing societies really rapidly undergoing this phenomenon. One of the main themes for digital revolution that keeps on coming up is smart communities. And in turn, smart communities are largely reliant on the Internet of Things. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues and the challenges specifically from the perspective of interoperability. I'll briefly touch upon data sharing and data management issues. And if time permits, I'll also just, maybe just in one slide talk about the cybersecurity challenges in the IoT ecosystem. Okay, so the first challenge that I want to highlight in my talk today is the interoperability of the IoT technology stack. So for us to better understand this, I wanted to work with an example. So if you look at this slide that I'm currently showing, we're currently looking at a micro level view of this phenomenon. And what we have here is one of the verticals, one of the systems in the overall IoT ecosystem, which is a smart home. And when you have this vertical, it's going to comprise of numerous heterogeneous devices. that are going to be connected together, and they're going to be talking to each other. So really, and then of course, there's going to be some additional components that do some sort of analytics or some sort of artificial intelligence, blockchain, stuff like that, right? So what I want to draw your attention to the fact is that for some of these devices that really need to interact with each other, they might actually be coming from different vendors. And it is very important for them to be able to successfully communicate with each other, to exchange data and information with each other, because some of the functionality can depend on this communication. For instance, the smart security system that you see on the right, it needs to talk to the smart door lock, right? If there is some sort of interoperability problem here, if they're not compatible, if they can't communicate, we're going to not be able to provide the services that we want. So really here what we're talking about is the interoperability of the technology stack, which starts off by compatibility at the application layer. So maybe one device is using one protocol, the other one is using a different protocol. Then we're talking about data format, data structuring issues. The encoding of the data from the sender could not be, it's possible, understandable by the decoding mechanisms at the receiver. That's another issue. And then finally, the underlying communication technology that is enabling this, interaction between the two devices, it's likely that they are also incompatible or they cannot interoperate with each other. And this problem is also visible in another use case where we talk about extending a particular vertical. So in this case, we have a smart home and we want to extend that and we want to bring in new devices. So we need to ensure that this new device does not compromise the interoperability of the system. So really, the first challenge in the IoT ecosystem is that of providing interoperability of the technology stack. And as I mentioned, it covers these three areas, the application layer protocols, the data formatting and structuring, and of course, the underlying communication technology. And as a result, what we see at a high level is the fact that smart communities today are maybe a little bit lacking, or they do not have the smart connections, quote unquote, that are needed for us to really realize the benefits of this paradigm. So there have been numerous attempts to solve these interoperability issues, and I'm not going to go over them, but you can see them here. You have interoperability as a service, you have SDNs and fog computing, open standards, and a lot of these are having an impact. But the main issue here perhaps is that all of these solutions, or at least most of these solutions, they are regional in the sense that they are not inclusive. So what we are proposing here is that for us to be able to meaningfully address this issue of interoperability in IoT and consequently in smart communities, we need to come together on a global platform that is well funded by all of the stakeholders. And we need to develop and discuss standards and policies for smart communities and the underlying enabling technologies, whether it is IoT, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so have you. So that's the first thing. The second challenge that I want to touch today is that of data management and sharing across trust boundaries. So anytime we talk about IoT, we're talking about a lot of data that is generated across the various verticals and within a vertical as well. And really the challenge here is to how to share that data and how to manage that data while simultaneously providing privacy to its user and making sure that this is not abused, this sharing is not abused. So I'm going to go to a macro level view of the problem now. And here I have a bunch of verticals that you could find in, let's say, a test smart community. So you have smart transportation, smart education, smart governance, smart neighborhoods, and all of that. And all of these verticals are connected to each other over the internet, which is why it's called the Internet of Things. And this together comprises the smart community that I'm using in this example. So the difference in this slide from the last graphic that I showed is the fact that now I'm talking about separate administrative domains, Because previously it was just one vertical that was under a single administrative authority. But now we have these distributed verticals, and it is possible that all of these verticals are under distributed administrative domains, which means that we will see institutional trust boundaries when data traverses from one vertical to another. And I have an animation here that explains this. So let's say you have smart healthcare vertical, and there is some data that you want to send to the smart industries because they're building some sort of medical equipment for you. But the moment the data crosses the trust boundary, this is going to raise an alarm and raise an alert with the administrative authority at the smart healthcare vertical. And the reason for that is because it's in a different administrative domain, there is a lack of trust, right? So what you end up seeing, or what ends up happening here, is that you will have silos of information and silos of data. And what I mean by that is that within a vertical or inside a vertical, you'll have a lot of data sharing happening, a lot of data going back and forth, but across verticals, the amount of sharing will be minimal. And because smart communities operate on the availability of data, this creates a serious obstacle for the efficient working and realization of the full potential of smart communities. You can also see the same phenomenon in the following slide. Again, I'm taking a micro level view, but here the difference is that all of the verticals are homogeneous. So whereas previously the verticals that I presented were all within a geographical region and were all heterogeneous, here I am talking about homogeneous verticals, but they are across geographical boundaries. So really, the trust boundaries are going to be slightly different here, but that same issue of a lack of trust is going to exhibit itself here as well, and you will again have reluctance in the sharing of data.
Dr. Tahir, one
Yes.
minute, please. Okay, thank you. I mean, 1 minute left for your talk. Sorry.
Sure. So I'll just quickly wrap up. The solution that we're suggesting here is that we want everybody to come to a global platform such as the G20 or the UNO, and we want to build global data standards and global policies for smart communities and IoT. And we want these policies to be transparent. We want them to cater to the fact that the user should be in control. We want them to take into account the explosion of the data ecosystem, and we want to ensure that systems can interoperate. Another final challenge is that of the attack surface in smart cities. And here, what I want to say is really the fact that the attack surface is so large that it makes very easy for attackers to break in. So for example, if an attacker wants to get into smart governance or smart energy, it might be the case that these subsystems are very well defended and very fortified. But what the attacker can do is target another system that is part of the same smart community and then break into that. And this system could have a lack of resources, which would result in weaker defenses. And then from there, they could transition to these other well-fortified systems. Finally, again, the solution here that we're proposing is that we want everybody to come together on a platform where we can come up with standards and policies and incorporate security and privacy into the design of smart communities and the IoT ecosystem. So I'd like to thank you for this wonderful opportunities, and I can take some questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Tahir. Really appreciate your talk. That brings us to the last but not least talk. So we are all eager to actually realize this digital revolution where we have ubiquitous AI and smart communities and aware cities and whatnot. But we have to think about the other aspect of that thing, is that all these technologies can lead to actually many threats and dangers that are a lot more than what we have right now. So basically, it's a double-edged sword, and there are benefits and there are actually problems. So how to deal with cybersecurity? So Dr. Muhammad Khurram Khan will actually brief us and address cybersecurity challenges and recommendations for the digital revolution. Dr. Khan, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Jalal. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum and good day. First of all, I would like to extend my profound gratitude to S20 for organizing such a wonderful event and inviting me to deliver a speech today. Actually, today I'm going to talk about cybersecurity challenges and recommendations. It's great to see that all the speakers in this webinar have touched upon the importance of cybersecurity in the digital revolution we are having currently. So as you know that we are living in a modern technological era in which everything, every useful thing, I should say, has ability to become a computer. The connectivity, computing power, intelligence, and of everyday objects are ushering in a new arena that provides us a high standard of living. Our smartphones, like we are using, are not just regular phones. Basically, they are the computers which could do anything as any standalone computer could do. So the modern microwaves and refrigerators with connectivity and intelligence are also computers, which make things hot or cold respectively. So if just you go 30 years back and somebody says that drones will be delivering, the food, refrigerators will be notifying the date of the products of expiry, and the autonomous cars will be driving passengers to their destination. Maybe this could have something, sounded like something coming straight out of sci-fi movies. But with the digital revolution, these things are becoming the reality. So the impact of the new frontiers is not only on the personal life, but it also makes limitless opportunities and transformations on the industries and manufacturing. So the concept of fourth industrial revolution is blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological spheres, and which provides exponential growth to the industries, factories, and manufacturing units around the world. So if you see in this slide that while we have great benefits discussed in the previous slide, there is something bad about this hyperconnectivity and too much reliance upon the technologies. The World Economic Forum every year publishes a report to manifest global risks faced by the world. And in their 15th edition of recently published report that was published in January, I guess, in 2020, they have categorized 5 critical global risks, which include economic, environmental, geopolitical, societal, and technological risks. As you can see on the left side, that the top 10 risks in terms of likelihood are data fraud or theft and cyber attacks, which are ranked at number 6 and 7. While on the other hand, the top 10 risks in terms of impact of cyber attacks ranked at number 8, which is quite scary for our hyper-connected world. This slide actually shows the notorious cyber incidents, which are considered as the biggest data breaches of the 21st century. And in 2013, Yahoo announced that it has suffered a cyber attack in which 3 billion accounts were hacked. And it is known as the most significant cyber attack in the history of the internet. In another attack in 2018, the personal data of almost 500 million users at the Marriott Hotel group was compromised. If you have ever happened to stay in the Marriott Hotel, so maybe you are one of the victims, your profile and your credentials, personal information is also available on the dark forum. So please, I advise you to change your credentials, And beyond the breaches like which I depicted here in this slide, criminal activities in the cyberspace is increasing exponentially, like I discussed earlier. And cyber attackers have found various ways during especially the COVID-19 pandemic to ramp up their tactics and take the advantages of the loopholes and the vulnerabilities through launching ransomware, phishing, and malware kind of attacks, which are very, very tenacious and dangerous for our society. And every individual and organization is on the radar of cyber criminals with a higher risk of becoming the next victim. And whether it is about safeguarding our data, critical infrastructure, or personal information, the impact of cyber attacks never be underestimated and overlooked at any cost. And that cyber threats are evolving with greater magnitude, impact, and sophistication, as we have discussed, and our other speakers have discussed today. And so, like we are innovating our strategies to protect our systems and softwares from cyber attacks, so do the cyber attackers with respect to evolving targets and techniques. As far as evolving targets are concerned, the information theft has already, always been the most expensive and the fastest rising consequence of cybercrime. In the modern connected and digitized world, the new targets are industrial control systems, safety instrumentation systems, you can see here, Internet of Things and 5G networks, which are backbone of the fourth industrial revolution and critical infrastructure. On the other hand, with we have a dilemma with the, here, that data always remains the prime target. And the new wave of cyber attacks could impact our political or social values. They can compromise our national security and sabotage the critical infrastructure, which I discussed earlier. And this all could be done through innovative and evolving techniques of social engineering, in which human is usually considered the weakest link of the security chain. And we have zero-day exploits, which are becoming a big concern as they target publicly known but still unpatched vulnerabilities in softwares and systems. And cyber criminals are developing sophisticated malwares, for example, Shamoon, which crippled down the business operations of Saudi Aramco back in 2012. So there is a new wave of adversarial artificial intelligence and machine learning based attacks, which are more targeted and complex in nature to detect and respond. So in this slide, I would like to discuss some recommendations and way forward to address the cybersecurity challenges which we have seen in the previous slides. So the first and foremost thing is that we need to understand that cybersecurity is our shared responsibility. We need to build a very cohesive strategic framework and ecosystem that should provide general public with cybersecurity awareness and cyber hygiene practices to protect them from the online threats, because everybody is going online. Our kids are, having its education online, and we are doing, work from home. So we need to have very good cyber hygiene and cybersecurity practices in order. And it is also imperative to commence cybersecurity academic and hands-on training programs to prepare skilled cyber workforce for the future. And we have to launch capacity and capability building programs. And we need to, these academic programs and initiatives should be strengthened by establishing world-class research programs to support the scientists and engineers and professionals so that they can spur innovation and entrepreneurship that basically underpins the cybersecurity industry. And in addition, you can see here on the slide, law enforcement agencies should also be equipped with the necessary skills, knowledge, and tools to investigate cyber incidents, and they have to be very proactive to curb them. So they have to go at par, than the cyber criminals to curb all the criminal activities. And it is very pertinent to say that cyber criminals will continue to innovate their tactics. Therefore, cyber policing must be also innovative. They have to address these challenges. Otherwise, it is very, very difficult, because there is an estimation that we will have $6 trillion cyber crime costs by the next few years. So which is too tenacious and dangerous for our society. And to deter the transnational cyber crimes and combat the criminal organizations, government need to strengthen their collaboration and alliance for the investigation and prosecution processes. And in addition, like you can see that we need to strengthen institutional frameworks with respect to people, processes, and technologies so that we can curb the cyber crimes, especially for the children and women, because they are becoming a very, very easy target for the cyber criminals. We need to establish the partnership and engage with the public and private sector and civil society and academic institutions so that we can address this challenge, because it is very indispensable and the need of the current unprecedented times we are living in. And moreover, the global tech companies should also play a vital role to beef up cybersecurity and fight against the cyber criminals and their networks. I hope that these recommendations could help to build a safe and resilient and peaceful cyberspace to fuel the velocity of the digital revolution. So the cybersecurity challenges, what we know, are just at the tip of the iceberg. You can see here, while the unknown risks and threats are analogous to the actual iceberg, which are hidden from us. Or maybe we are unaware from them, maybe they can strike anytime to us, or maybe they can cripple down the cyberspace. Then we could know that, these are the actual risks. So with this, I thank you all for your listening and attention. And if you have any questions you could have in the session, over to you, Dr. Jalal. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan, for your talk and recommendations and insights. I would like to thank everybody for their valuable talks and insights and recommendations that we saw in their speeches. So we are a little bit behind schedule, unfortunately, but I will ask everybody permission if we can take an extra 15 minutes so we can do some discussions and manage to close the session. So let's start with the discussions and to address some of the questions that we got either online or offline and so on. So we will start with a question for Dr. Al-Nafouri. That since, as we all know, S20 is one of the newer engagements in the G20, and basically it reflects the aspiration of the science community. So in your opinion, what is the role of national research centers and universities and academic institutes in the digital revolution, and how can they be a part of making a decision or putting policies and so on?
Thank you, Dr. Jalal, for this question. So in the way we try to the recommendations we put forward in the S20 are all science-based. And since the academies are the hub of where all the scientists of the G20, it's the hub where all the scientists are available. Basically, they have a big role in pushing these recommendations forward. I'll give you one example. For example, one recommendation that the S20 has put forward is basically having a more resilient network for connectivity and for digital technologies in general. Now, more resilient networks requires basically some research investments in having more resilient networks, for example, through satellite communications, through high altitude platforms, through for example, drones. And this will definitely result in a more resilient connectivity. So the Science Academy definitely have a big say in pushing the scientific agenda as it relates to facing the critical transitions, since basically they contain the minds, it's a selection of the best minds in the G20 countries.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nafouri. We will also take one question from the audience, where one of the audience is mentioning that vulnerability and resilience involve hardware and software. Some presentations seem to focus only on AI, but the rest of the software is also part of the digital revolution and should also be considered. Shouldn't it? I feel this question maybe relates most to Dr. Tucker, if you have any take on it, or anybody else. Go ahead. You are on mute, Dr. Tucker, I'm sorry.
Rick, do you want to comment on that?
You're on mute also.
I think this is your area.
Right, so can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, sure. So he's saying that vulnerability and resilience involve hardware and software, not just AI. So the rest of the software is also part of the digital revolution, and shouldn't it, or shouldn't it not be there? So basically the focus on software and hardware, not just AI or specific technologies.
Yes, so it's everything. Yes, so I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but certainly software is an important issue, and there needs to be resilience in the software. I guess that was what I was suggesting Rick might know about, but certainly hardware needs to be resilient as well. And when it comes to things like weather events and bushfires and so on, then resilience really revolves around redundancy and the ability for the network to manage to stay alive even when parts of it go down. I guess another aspect of resilience when it comes to software and hardware has to do with data centers, which are really the center of everything now in the digital infrastructure. And resilience in data centers is likely to be an issue as well, because if there's an extreme weather event or power failure and data centers go down, then that could well have a large impact on the network as a whole.
Yeah, so basically we're saying that all aspects of software, all over the stacks, whether it's hardware, software, firmware, operating system, I think yes, the resilience has to be all over the place to some extent. I agree with you. Yes. Another question we have is that Microsoft Research, since its establishment, managed to actually foster strong collaboration between the academic sector and the private sector. It was a very good example of working together closely, which often resulted in new ideas and innovations and unique perspective and so on. So how can we enable much more collaboration between the private sector and the public sector and the academic sector, and as well as collaboration between nations and across borders? So this question might be for Dr. Rashid with his experience, with his vast experience in Microsoft research. So, Dr. Rashid.
Sure. Yeah, what I would always say when I was at Microsoft Research is that technology transfer is a full contact sport. Basically it requires people being able to know each other and trust each other. Within the research team at Microsoft, and the product teams, I would encourage the individuals to work together. And in fact, we set up a program where any researcher that wanted to work in a product team in order to transfer their technology could always come back to research. So even though they might be away for some period of time, they would have what I call the golden ticket to come back into the research organization. And this made people comfortable with the idea that they could take time out of their career to make sure that their technology made it into a product. I think in terms of the broader world, getting researchers and people within corporations and product teams into better contact with each other is the best way to ensure that ideas move. And to the extent that individuals take some time to help move their technologies into products, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing from my perspective. And certainly if you look at my own career, almost everything I ever worked on is in somebody's product. Many of those products are still running, much of that software is still running today. So I always viewed that as an important part of what I was doing as a researcher.
All right, thank you very much.
Can I interrupt? Just kind of follow up on that answer. Rick, so what about the situation where university researchers interact with people in places like Microsoft? University researchers often worry about publications and citation indices, and a movement into product development working with industry might slow that down. How can we get around the issue of improving interactions between universities and industry?
Well, I think some of that we need to change the way the universities measure their professors and their researchers. I mean, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, we didn't just measure on the basis of publications, but we actually looked at the impact of the work. And the impact of the work, can very well be in its use and its impact on society. So I think you have to take a broader metric, and while, I mean, especially these days, I think publication metrics have become somewhat ridiculous because there's been such a wide proliferation of publications, and there's, it's very difficult to use that measure as a measure of excellence the way it might have been used 20 years ago. So I think you need to look broadly at the impact of a researcher's work, and not just look at the number of publications, but look at the impact of the work.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Another issue of concern is standardization. So basically how to get all those devices and all those technologies to talk to each other. So this is a big issue, and how to govern all those technologies and devices, and how to govern the data that comes out of those technologies. I think Dr. Tahir mentioned a little bit, or touched on the policies, regulations, and how to get things to interoperate. So do you have any insights in that area, Dr. Tahir, or anybody else?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Jalal. As I mentioned in the talk, clearly there have been endeavors from both the academia as well as the industry to address this lack of policies and standards. However, I think largely these efforts have been limited to a regional scale. So for example, you'll see a few countries from the European Union that come together and they'll draft a policy on a standardization. Similarly, in the industry, you'll have something like the Zigbee Alliance, or other organizations and consortiums like the W3C. So people are working towards standardization, towards regulations and all of these things, but perhaps a more diverse effort, a more inclusive effort is needed. And for that, I think the S20 and the G20 platform, or the UN platforms, are extremely helpful, where we can bring in a larger member base, and we can have more countries from across the globe, and then they can sit together and draft policies and procedures. Now that's one part of it. The other part is that you need to incentivize countries and incentivize the stakeholders to adopt these policies and standards. And perhaps the incentivization mechanism should be such that it should reward the early adopters, so that there is this desire amongst the stakeholders that I want to jump onto this bandwagon and get the most benefit. And once a critical mass of trust has been established in these policies, I believe the stakeholders will be willing to be more ambitious in terms of the policies, the standards that we're talking about. And because of that critical mass, we can then transition on to the more meaningful issues when we talk about lack of standards and policies. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Of course, one of the big challenges right now, and Dr. Khan touched about it, is the cybersecurity aspects of all those things, whether AI, big data, Internet of Things, and so on. So, Dr. Khan, what do you think? How can we get, well, number one, cybersecurity is a big problem that touches all aspects, whether hardware, software, and all stack levels. So how can we get everybody involved from different disciplines to get together and talk about cybersecurity? And what role should the academic institutes plus public sector and private sector can do in this area?
Well, it's a great question, Dr. Jalal. First of all, I would like to second Dr. Rick, that he's absolutely right that we should be judging by the impact we make on the society. Okay, so there could be a lot of publications, but if they are not churning out to the impact, so it's useless for the society, because there is a lot of funding government is spending on the people, on the human resource, so that it should have real impact on our society, either in terms of the business development, in terms of the maybe the quality of the life of the people, or maybe coming with the new products and services and systems. So this is the first aspect. And coming back to your question, because it is related to the same point. Well, universities are basically the powerhouse of education, knowledge and innovation, and they have to play a major role in creating new horizons of research and development, entrepreneurship programs, so that we can address the challenges we have for the digital revolution, especially in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence and so on. And we need to strengthen our, scientific and academic programs from different specialities. For example, cybersecurity is not just a subject of computer science now. It has become a subject of social sciences, arts, and business administration, even the medical sciences. So our students should be taught, the basics about the protection guidelines and so on. So, like I mentioned that, there are so many things, there are so many horizons, and what is not touching upon the computers and internet these days? There is nothing, So everything is touching upon the computers and internet. So therefore, all students need to know about the cybersecurity, what kind of risk they would face, and our business, executives should be taught about the cybersecurity. When they go to the business, they should know that what kind of business risk they would have when they become the CEOs or the business managers. And we need to work in the triple helix innovation model, which is second the point of Dr. Rick, that where universities, private and public sector organizations should work together to address the challenges and the problems they are facing. Especially the university professors should work closely with the industry to solve the most pertinent and prevailing problems we are facing. And we could build, so that we could build a safe and resilient cyberspace when all the stakeholders will come together from academia, from business, from industry, from civil society, even from the law enforcement agencies, so that we can have a very safe and resilient cyberspace. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Any other takers regarding cybersecurity, maybe especially in smart communities, Dr. Tahir? Briefly, please. I think the microphone is on mute. Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the
hello, I think we lost Dr. Tahir. Okay.
Has made a very good point. Our approach to cybersecurity. Can you hear me, Dr. Jalal?
Yes, now we hear you. Go ahead.
Apologies for that.
What I was saying was that I fully agree with Dr. Khurram. He's made a very good point where we need to take a more holistic approach towards cybersecurity, a more inclusive approach, where we bring in all of the stakeholders and we raise awareness on cybersecurity issues, starting from the very micro level challenges all the way to the macro level issues. In regards to the smart community and the challenges thereof, the issue, as I pointed out in the talk as well, is that number one, the attack surface there is extremely large. So you could have various entry points or potential entry points for attackers to exploit.
Yes, Dr. Tyler, I think your connection is cutting off.
These entry points, hardening all of these.
Dr. Tyler, it seems like your connection is cutting out. So, yeah, okay, if you can give us briefly what you think about it. So it seems like you're back now.
So I was just saying, I think the issue with smart communities here is that the attack surface is extremely large, and it's very hard to harden all of these entry points or potential entry points. And then the second issue is that a lot of the infrastructure is novel, and we're not really experienced enough to understand how to secure it against all of these potential attack vectors. So I think together these two challenges, they really require attention from the community, and we need to come together and come to a global platform, put in the funding from all of the stakeholders, and investigate and explore ways of securing all of this digital infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tyler, for your take on that. Going back to critical transitions as were defined in this webinar. So I guess cybersecurity or cybersecurity incidents would count as one of the critical transitions, or can lead to a critical transition to some extent. Dr. Tariq, you mentioned various critical transitions and so on. You mentioned 6, I think, in your talk. Are there any mechanisms or tools that help identify or find those critical transitions in order to address them or find solution for them? You have any insight on that?
Thank you, Dr. Jalal, for a very nice question. And so the way we went about this in our task force is as follows. First of all, we relied on a survey we relied on our task force members, on our 43 task force members from various science academies who work hard on helping us find these critical transitions. That's one. The second thing we did is actually we interviewed tens of experts around the world to actually get their insights of what critical transitions they think are relevant to digital technology. The third approach is actually we relied on the World Economic Forum, which publishes a yearly report of the risks, the global risks that face us, both in terms of in terms of impact and the probability of happening. So this is the third way of doing that. Now, one more thing I want to mention here is that in the S20, one of the task forces is particularly focused on figuring out foresight approaches, meaning approaches to actually look into the future and see what critical transitions we might actually face. Last point I want to mention here is that, and basically I would like to quote Professor Rick Rashid, which is the following. I mean, even if we are not able to identify the critical transitions, perhaps the best preparation we have is to actually have well-educated and high research centers of high quality that are able to to address any new transition that affects humanity in a fast and effective way. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq. I really appreciate it. I think we can take 1 or 2 questions from the audience so that actually at least we address some of the issues. And one of the questions from the audience, and I will take the liberty to rephrase it a little bit. Someone is asking from the audience, I guess she's a researcher from one of the research institutes, saying, in our opinion, what are the most promising technologies to work on, to do research on those days, that will actually basically G20 will be interested in, or at least S20 or G20 would be interested in. So where are the areas to focus our research and so on? So any takers for this question or any insights?
How to overcome the COVID-19? This is the first and foremost, problems for the G20 and for all over the world, So technologically speaking, we see that, because every technology has a confluence, and we are having a digital revolution. So all the technologies are having a lot of importance for our life, especially when we are seeing that, we have digital vulnerable populations, when everything is going online and our kids and children are learning, everything online, and schools are going online. So in this situation, and if you go to sub-Saharan African countries or South Asian countries, or maybe some least developed countries where the people don't have access to the internet and the education, so how these kids will learn, online, because they don't have computer, they don't have internet, they don't have infrastructure. So this is a very promising and big challenge for all the stakeholders, for all the policymakers and global leaders, to ponder upon. So in my opinion, that we have to first look for this thing, that how to provide digital vulnerable populations access to the internet, for the education, especially for the girls, because we have sustainable digital goals of the United Nations. According to that, we have to send our girls to the education, we have to literate them, we have to send our kids to the education. But in this situation, how to provide this infrastructure, how to provide them the services, how to provide them the technology. So this is a very big concern for the G20, in my opinion. Yeah, if maybe other speakers can also add their point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khan. Anybody else have any insights or comments?
Well, I'll just make the comment that I think one area that if you look over the next few years, one of the issues that we have as a society is that we can't actually, write, quality software fast enough. I mean, at this point, our society depends tremendously on our ability to write software that actually does all the things that we need to do. We're in a digital world, this is digital revolution, and we need to be able to create software. And you're seeing problems in a lot of traditional industries right now. You look at some of the issues that Boeing has had, with their software, some of the issues that Volkswagen has been having with software with their new electric cars. I mean, a lot of traditional companies don't have the knowledge or the ability to write software as fast as they need to. And so one of the opportunities, I think, potentially for students looking forward in the next few years is to go into areas that allow us to automatically create software. And right now you're actually seeing some progress in that area, a combination of proof technologies that have been developed in addition to AI, where you basically are able to use AI to prune the proof trees, if you want to think of it that way, when you're either doing program analysis or program generation. And so, so I think that's actually a very promising area. And I think if you look at the next few years, there's a good chance that more and more of our software will be automatically generated as opposed to being written by people.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Dr. Tucker, you wanted to say something? I thought, yeah.
Well, in fact, what I was about to say was covered 2 previous speakers, so I agree with both of them.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think for the benefit of time, I think we have to come to a conclusion. So according to the agenda, we will have everybody give 1 minute or less a closing statement on how they see things moving forward, hopefully, and so on. So starting with the same order, Dr. Tariq Al-Nafouri, do you have a closing statement?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jalal, for hosting us today. One thing that's interesting as we actually went through this, the S20, is that the actual mission of the S20 was Foresight, navigating critical transitions. Such mission was actually put forward or conceived even before like COVID-19 kicked in. And we can see that had we been more prepared for COVID-19, definitely our life would have been much better. We would be more able to actually cope and deal with COVID-19. So what I would like to say is that foresight, just like, for example, Professor Rashid mentioned that, like, writing quick software is an essential quality. Foresight and the ability to actually foresee the future and prepare ourselves for the future should be an essential skill that actually, like, academia and industry and governments in general deal with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq. So moving along to Dr. Tucker, do you have any closing statements?
Yes, we haven't said much about it in this particular webinar, but one of the key focuses of the Digital Revolution Task Force has been to think about how the digital revolution can benefit society. In fact, if it doesn't benefit society, then there's really no point. And we have felt that we need to really take into account the societal impact of everything we do as scientists and engineers working on our technologies. And one specific example that we've also considered in our considerations is the question of the digital divide, the so-called digital divide, where some people who might be geographically or economically disadvantaged don't have access to the technologies that others do. And I think that we as a technology society, or as a group of technologists, need to do is focus on thinking about ways that our technologies can overcome that digital divide so that everyone on the planet has equal opportunities to take advantage of the digital revolution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tucker. I really appreciate it. Moving on, a closing statement from Dr. Rashid.
Well, I'll just address the students and the young faculty. I mean, you are the digital revolution. I mean, you are the people that are going to make the changes for the future. And if you look at a lot of the technologies today, those were things that were developed back when I was a student, and I was trying to build my career. I think the key thing is to follow your passion, explore areas without fear, and do your best to change the world in a positive way.
Excellent advice. Thank you very much. Dr. Tahir, if you have any closing statements.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Jalal. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can so far.
Okay. So I just have a very short message here. What Dr. Rod Tucker mentioned really resonated with me. I feel that we need to put aside our differences, this nationalist agenda that's recently emerging from various parts of the world, and perhaps we need to look at the cumulative good, the aggregate good and benefit of the society, because some of these challenges that we are highlighting today, no individual country, no 3 or 4 group of countries have the resources to solve these challenges. So I think the parting message from my side at least would be that we all need to come together as a society and address all of these challenges, putting forward more of a holistic, inclusive, globalist agenda rather than individual policies.
Well said. Thank you very much, Dr. Tahir. Dr. Khan, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, actually, I would like to underscore the importance of cybersecurity because it is becoming a very complex and national security issue that needs to be understood by our policymakers, leaders, and community, especially the G20 leaders, because we will have the G20 summit here. And as we are, having a lot of challenges, so the first and the foremost, challenge we have in cybersecurity is the skill gap. So we don't have the people. We will have 3.5 million unattended jobs by next year. We don't have the people, so we have to build very resilient and very good academic programs. We need to have more collaboration to fill this gap. And we need to start more vocational programs, technical programs, technology programs, and educational programs in the universities. And on the other hand, I would like to just raise one point about the artificial intelligence, which is becoming a very commonplace in our daily life. And, it is impacting everything, every industry we have. So as AI is getting more sophisticated, it is becoming more dangerous for the, for us And because cyber criminals are using deep learning algorithms and this kind of techniques, to breach the security systems. Therefore, we need to have more scientific and coordinated efforts to combat the cybersecurity challenges for a resilient and safe cyberspace. And lastly, I would like to, thanks the Digital Revolution Task Force being its member. I extend my appreciations to the task force members for their great efforts and contributions. Once again, I'm grateful to the S20 for inviting me to this wonderful webinar. Thank you all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. Thank you, everybody. I would like to thank all the panelists and speakers for their valuable insight and comments and recommendations and so on. So thank you, and I think we learned a lot. And thank you for the audience for participating and being part of this. This session has been recorded, and it will be up online hopefully very soon. And thank you, everybody. Really appreciated meeting you virtually. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Jalal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This concludes our session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.